My name is Tiffany Q, and welcome to my ABRSM Grade 5 Theory Lessons series, where I record snippets of my live lessons with my students. Please note that this is not a substitute for a textbook. If you're preparing for the theory exam, I would still recommend having a teacher to guide you through both the coursework and exam paper preparation. In this lesson, we will be going through a sample paper on the rhythm question. This is the Music Theory Practice Paper 2021, Grade 5, Paper D. The first question in your rhythm section is a time signature question. Circle the correct time signature for each of these bars. So we will have 3 different bars full of different groupings and rhythms, and we need to circle the correct time signature for each one. The first thing I would do is I would write out all the groupings so that I have a good idea of what to expect for each of the possibilities. 9/16 stands for 3 dotted quavers in a bar. 3/4 is 3 crotchets in a bar. And 6/8 stands for 2 dotted crotchets in a bar. So that already tells me my grouping. When I take a look at the rhythms here, I notice that they are divided into what appears to be 3 different groupings. So that already rules out the 6/8. Then we'll take a look at each of the time signatures to see if they would match. So for the 9/16, there are 3 groups, and each group adds up to a dotted quaver, which is, just to remind you, 3 semiquavers. If we take a look at our first group here, we have 1 semiquaver, 2 semiquavers, and the quaver in the middle stands for 2 semiquavers. So there are 4 altogether in this group, so that's an incorrect grouping for 9/16. If we take a look at 3/4, it's 3 crotchets in a bar. This one here, that does indeed add up to a crotchet. Next we have a triplet. With these tuplets, sometimes we can isolate them and figure them out first. So the triplet here is actually this triplet quavers, which add up to a crotchet equivalent. So that there is another crotchet. It might look different because of the dotted rhythm, but sometimes we have to get used to seeing them in different forms. And then finally we have our third crotchet there. So the answer is 3/4. Now, if we see 3/4 and 6/8 together as options, we need to be very careful because they are very similar. Because technically, they do contain the exact same rhythmical values, but it depends on their grouping. If it was 6/8, we would generally expect to see 2 different groups paired in dotted crotchets. For the next question, we have 7/8, 2/4, and 5/8. So there are a few ways of going about this. Because 7/8, we can't actually figure out the groupings of it because there are many different versions of it. So you could literally just count the quavers in this instance and count them as 7 of these quavers. Now, looking at the others, I see a similarity. This one here, I can count 5 quavers. And this one, I could count 2 crotchets because that's the proper grouping of it. Or I can count 4 quavers if I wanted to. Okay, so I'm just going to write both of those there as options. Looking at this here, we can see 2 groups. It does appear that this first group seems larger than the second group. Okay, but if this whole group adds up to a crotchet, and this is a crotchet, then it would be the 2/4. So let's see if that is the case. Well, first of all, I spot this rhythm here. It's very important to recognize these dotted rhythms by sight. It'll save you a lot of time rather than working it out. It is possible to work it out, but it might be easier just to recognize that. That there is the equivalent of 1 quaver. I'm going to write out a few of the common dotted rhythms here, just to remind you. So this here, the equivalent of both of them added together, is your minim. This will be your crotchet. And then if I add another beam going across, is the quaver. Okay, then the next one, 2 semiquavers, is our second quaver. We have our third quaver here, fourth and fifth. So very clearly we can see that this is our 5/8 time. And then finally, 4/2 is 4 minims in a bar. 6/4 is 2 dotted minims. So probably be seeing 2 groups, or we'll be able to easily divide them into that. And then 4/4 time is our trusted 4 crotchets in a bar. Now 4/4 time can also be depicted as a C, which stands for common time. And then I'll take this opportunity to mention could common time, which stands for the 2/2 time signature. So sometimes we might get these letters instead. So that's just a little side note there. Okay, back to the question. So let's take a look at all of our rhythms. I notice a 2-bit here, so maybe we can work that out first. That is the equivalent of 1 minim. Okay, so we have 1 minim here, we have 1 minim here. And then very quickly we can tell it's not 4/4 because there are already 2 minims in the first half of the bar. So it can't be this one. And it can't really be 6/4/2 because, first of all, the grouping is quite odd that we have minim plus a minim, because in 6/4 usually we'd be dividing it as, you know, dotted minim plus dotted minim. And just to count all the minims again, well, this dotted quaver plus semiquaver is equal to a crotchet plus a crotchet, so that entire thing also adds up to a minim, and then 2 crotchets adds up to a minim. So very quickly, because of the grouping and because of the number of beats, we can tell that that is the 4/2 time. The next question that they will ask you in the exam is one of those conversion questions, converting compound to simple or vice versa. For this sort of question, I would always look at the one that they present us with first. Here is a bar in compound time. Now, compound time means that the beats naturally divide into 3 sections. So 9/8, we are dealing with dotted crotchets as beats. So I'm going to circle all the main beats. That is 1 dotted crotchet. This is 1 dotted crotchet. And this is 1 dotted crotchet. So we can very clearly see how they divide as the beats and what their subdivisions are. So now they're asking, which of the following shows the bar above correctly rewritten in simple time? Take a look at all the time signatures, because sometimes there may be that one odd one out that doesn't quite make sense. In this case, all of them are the exact same, 3/4, 3/4, 3/4, meaning 3 crotchets in a bar. So what we're doing here is we are converting a dotted crotchet into a crotchet. So we're translating one meaning to the other. Taking a look at our first beat here, we have a dotted crotchet that's been divided evenly into 2 parts, making a duplet. If I take a crotchet beat, okay, and I want to evenly divide it into 2, I just get 2 regular quavers. Now, looking here, it seems that the first beat of each one is indeed the quavers, so that doesn't really help us very much. Let's take a look at our second one here, second beat. Now, this one, in its basic form, is just 3 quavers, which is the dotted crotchet beat divided evenly into 3. Now they did make that into a dotted rhythm, okay? But ultimately it's a division of 3. So if we want the same thing for our crotchet beat, we want to divide that into 3, we must make that into a triplet to indicate that that whole group equals just 1 crotchet. And we can add some dotted rhythms in there as well. So, looking back at this, it seems that this one here is the correct one, and this one here is also correct. So this one here is immediately incorrect. Now there's no need to put these crosses in for the incorrect ones, because for the question you only tick 1 box. But I'm just going to put that in here so that we can see and keep track of the question. Okay, the last beat, which is the 3rd beat here, we have just 1 beat, which is a dotted crotchet in the compound time. So we need to find 1 beat in the simple time, and that's easy. It's the first one here. It's simply, not very elegant with the annotations today, so it is simply a crotchet. And if we look at the remaining ones, this is the correct one here. That one is way too long anyway, and it actually is too long for the bar of 3/4 time, so that's wrong. And that is our correct answer. So my biggest tip will be to take out the individual beats from the example that they give you, be it in compound time or simple time, because they might give you either. So pick out the main beats first, and then study the options that you have. See if the time signatures correspond, so do they have the same number of main beats in a bar, and then see if you can match the beats to each other. Do they translate into the same meaning in the different styles that they're in? (1.3) These are the wordy questions. Complete the following 2 sentences by adding a number to each. It's amazing how students can find this difficult, or they might just miss a small detail that completely throws them off the meaning. So my advice would be to read it very, very slowly and to write out absolutely everything into notes rather than the words, because we are not used to seeing these as words. So in 12/8 time, okay, I'm not even reading the end. I'm just going to write out what I understand of 12/8. It's a compound quadruple time signature with 4 dotted crotchets in a bar. So if we have the number 12, it generally means 4 beats in a bar, and it's compound time. And lo and behold, that's the question they ask us. There are something dotted crotchet beats in a bar. Now, just to be extra careful, dotted crotchets. Okay, so how many of these are in every single bar? I think we have our answer. The answer is 4. Then here, a double dotted minim is equal to how many demi-semiquavers? So demi-semiquavers. Okay, again, being quite paranoid here. Quavers look like this, semiquavers look like this, and then demi-semiquavers would have the extra beam. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So remember the extra beam. These are your demi-semiquavers now. And we have 8 of them in 1 crotchet. Okay, so this now, double dotted minim. Write it out. What on earth is this? So you can see it very clearly. So 2 dots mean that you add a half of the note to the note value. So the note value is the minim here, and we add on a crotchet, and we further add on a quaver. So how many demi-semiquavers can fit here? Well, we know that there are 8 in 1 crotchet, so I'm going to put 8 here. And then in a minim, we know a minim is twice a crotchet, so it's going to be 16, because 8 plus 8 is equal to 16. And then the quaver here is half of a crotchet, which is 4. Then we add all of this together like a maths equation, and we should get 28. 1.4. Tick one box to show which bar is grouped correctly. So this here is the groupings question. Take a look at the time signature 9/8 and write out the grouping. 9/8 time, we will have 3 beats in a bar, and each beat is a dotted crotchet beat. So generally we like to see them organized in 3 groups if possible. We want to see the beginning of the first beat, the beginning of the second, and the beginning of the third. Now sometimes it's not always possible, and I'll give you an example of it in a second, but if it is possible, then it must be grouped that way. All the rhythms here are basically identical, but the way that they're arranged and organized is different, so that is the key. So identify where all the dotted crotchets are. We have a crotchet here, and then we have 2 semi-quavers, so that seems to be the first group. Okay, we look at this, we have something complicated going on. So we have 4 demi-semi-quavers here. We know that 4 demi-semi-quavers is equal to 1 quaver because 8 demi-semi-quavers is a crotchet, so half of that would be a quaver. So this here, 3 quavers, is our second beat. This is our third beat, so it appears that the first one is correct. Just to double check, let's take a look at the others. So the first dotted crotchet beat is non-existent because you see here they've extended it a little bit over here. Okay, so I'm not quite sure, that is very confusing. So it's either this is equal to a minim or that's a crotchet and that's a crotchet. So that already is a red flag. And then if we look at this one here, why is that random quaver on its own when it could easily be tied, sorry, not tied, it should be grouped to something else. Okay, so the fact that that's all on its own, this is one group, and then this should be one group, and that should easily be able to join onto that one, but it's not. So that grouping is also incorrect. And finally, the rests questions. Pay attention to your time signature first. 3/2 time, 3 minims in a bar. Tick or cross each box to show whether the rests are correct or incorrect. 2 things you need to check. Number 1, does it add up to the bar? Number 2, is it written or grouped correctly? Okay, so let's check. That's 1 minim. That's 1 minim. So this should all add up to 1 minim. And just looking and adding it up together, it does. So is it grouped correctly or not? If we have rests in the middle of a beat, we always have to divide that beat into 2, and then maybe into 2 again, and into 2. So you keep dividing it into 2 until you're able to fill in the rests. So half of a minim is crotchets. So you see that this has already been divided into 2. We have our crotchet here, and then we have this here. But this is still, isn't enough. So we have to divide this into 2 again. So a crotchet divided into 2 becomes quavers. So that's exactly how they've grouped this. So they've popped a quaver rest here, and then they have a semi quaver rest here in order to make that into a quaver and this into a quaver. Okay, so think of if they had flipped those around, it would be a very, uneven grouping of the rests there. So that's the only way they can write it out. Also, generally that would not be great either for the simple time signature. So that there is correct. Okay, moving on. This here is a minim. Okay, I'm going to deal with that in a second. That is another minim. So this must be a minim. It's a triplet, but we have a crotchet and a quaver and a crotchet. So we know that a minim, if we divide that into a triplet, it should be 3 crotchets. So the fact that this rest here is a quaver rest is wrong. So it really should be a crotchet rest in order for that whole triplet to add up to a minim. And then finally, looking at this one here, well, the grouping here is already really bad. It's very incorrect because we should be able to see that as 1 minim. So it should really be that. Okay, but also looking at it, if we're literally counting the minims, we've got 1 minim here, 2 minims here, 3 minims here already, and there are still 2 crotchets. So that is wrong. It doesn't even add up. There's too many rests. It's bad grouping. End of story. And that is that.